to Conspiraseed. This week we're going to be talking about a case that kind of played out similarly to the Sunderman killings, in which a child was sadly attacked by other children. It does play out differently as it doesn't have anything to do with cryptids, and the victim is much younger than his attackers. They weren't friends. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it, and let's just get into it.
Nothing like being subscribed to Conspiraseed on YouTube. Nothing like it.
James Bulger, born March 16th, 1990, was a normal 2-year-old boy who was out shopping with his mom on February 12th, 1993. It was a Friday, and two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, were skipping school and were hanging out at the local mall, generally seen on the CCTV observing children. The two can also be seen shoplifting various items throughout the day, including candy, batteries, a troll doll, and a can of blue paint. Enter James Bulger and his mother Denise into the shopping center. They are in the butcher shop on the lower floor of the mall around 3:40 p.m. when Denise lets go of her son's hand momentarily to pay for their meat. Once she paid, she looked down and James was gone. She looked around and still could not find him. She began to panic. CCTV shows us that Robert and John approached James shortly after his mom let go of his hand. They took him by the hand and led him out of the mall. They took him about a quarter of a mile from the mall to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, where they dropped him on his head and he suffered several injuries to his face. An eyewitness said that when he saw James at the canal, the boy was crying his eyes out. The group of boys then went on a 2.5-mile walk across Liverpool. They were seen by 38 people, but most bystanders didn't intervene. 2 people did talk to the boys, however, and were either told that he was their brother or that he was a lost child and they were taking him to the police station. Eventually, the boys arrived in Walton. The Walton Lane police station was across the road, and the duo hesitated but then led James up a steep bank to a railway line. One of the boys threw the blue paint they shoplifted into James's left eye. They kicked him, stomped on him, and threw bricks and stones at him. They placed batteries in his mouth and then dropped a 10-kilogram or 22-pound fish plate on his head. He sustained 10 skull fractures as a result of the bar striking his head. A coroner said that James suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be identified as the fatal blow. Robert and John then laid James across the railway tracks and weighted his head down with rubble in hopes that a train would hit him and his death would be ruled an accident. After they left, his body sadly was hit and cut in half by a train. His severed body was discovered by a group of children 2 days later. A forensic pathologist testified that James had died before he was struck by the train. Police suspect that the boys had sexually assaulted James, as his shoes, socks, trousers, and underpants had all been removed, and he also reported that James's genitals had been touched. When Robert and John were questioned about this aspect of the attack by detectives and a child psychiatrist, the pair were reluctant to give details. When John was let out on parole, spoiler for later, his psychiatrist reported that visiting and revisiting the issue with John as a child and now as an adolescent, he gives no account of any sexual element to the offense. The police quickly were able to get to the mall and find the low-resolution CCTV video of James's abduction, and noted that it was 2 unidentified boys with him. The railway embankment where his body had been found was soon covered with hundreds of flowers. The family of one boy who was detained for questioning but subsequently released had to flee the city due to threats from vigilantes. A breakthrough finally came when a woman, upon seeing slightly enhanced images of the 2 boys on national TV, recognized John and remembered seeing him play hooky with Robert in the area on the day of the disappearance. She contacted police, and the boys were arrested. The fact that the suspects were so young came as a shock to the investigating officers. Early press reports and police statements had referred to James as being seen with 2 youth, and many took that to suggest that it was teenagers. The ages of the boys were hard to identify from the blurry CCTV images as well. Forensic tests confirmed that both boys had the same blue paint on their clothing as found on James's body. Both had blood on their shoes, and the blood on Robert's shoes was matched to James through DNA testing. A pattern of bruising on James's right cheek matched the pattern of the upper part of a shoe worn by Robert. A paint mark in the front of one of John's shoes indicated to authorities that he must have used some force when he kicked James. Robert is said to have asked authorities whether James had been taken to the hospital to get him alive again. The two were charged with the murder of James Bulger on February 20th, 1993, and appeared at South Sefton Youth Court on February 22nd, 1993, where they were put into custody to await trial. In the aftermath of their arrests, and throughout the media accounts of the trial, The boys were referred to as Child A and Child B. Up to 500 protesters gathered at the court during the boys' initial court appearances. The parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats from vigilantes. The full trial started on November 1st, 1993, conducted as an adult trial with the two boys in a separate area away from their parents and the judge. The boys denied the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. The attempted abduction was due to a failed attempt to lead a different 2-year-old boy away, but this was prevented by the boy's mother. Each boy sat in view of the court on raised chairs so they could see out of the dock designed for adults, and were accompanied by 2 social workers and guards. The boys were considered by the court to be capable of mischievous discretion, meaning an ability to act with criminal intent, as they were mature enough to understand what they were doing was seriously wrong. A child psychiatrist who interviewed Robert before the trial was asked in court whether he would know the difference between right and wrong, and that it was wrong to take a young child from his mother, it was wrong to cause injury to a child, to which the psychiatrist answered in the positive. A Home Office's forensic psychiatrist who interviewed John said unequivocally that he knew the difference between right and wrong. Neither of the boys spoke during the trial, and the case against them was based on a large extent on more than 20 hours of tape-recorded police interviews with the boys, which were then played in court. Robert was considered to have taken the leading role in the abduction process, though it was John who had apparently initiated the idea of taking James to the railway. John later described how James seemed to like him, holding his hand and allowing him to pick him up on the trek to the murder area. The solicitor for John said that Robert was one of the most frightening children he had ever seen. The prosecution admitted a number of exhibits during the trial, including a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone, James's underpants, and their rusty iron bar described as the fish plate. The pathologist spent 33 minutes outlining the injuries sustained by James. Many of the injuries to his legs had been inflicted after he was stripped from the waist down. Brain damage was extensive and included hemorrhaging. The boys were found guilty of James's murder on November 24, 1993, becoming the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century. The judge told the boys that they had committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity, and in my judgment, your conduct was both cunning and very wicked. The judge sentenced them to the juvenile detention hall with the recommendation they should be kept in custody for very, very many years to come. Now, shortly after the trial, where the judge recommended a minimum of 8 years, 2 lords of England recommended that the boys should serve a minimum of 10 years. However, there is also a petition with nearly 280,000 signatures to increase the time spent by both boys in prison. The campaign was successful, and in July of 1994, it was announced that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February of 2008 at the age of 28. The increased minimum was overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords that ruled it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide a minimum sentence for young offenders. Some British newspapers claimed that the attack was actually inspired by a movie and campaigned for the rules on video nasties to be tightened. And a movie that was rented by John's father shortly before the incident was Child's Play 3, where the doll Chucky was splashed with blue paint during a paintball game. However, it's not sure if John had actually watched the movie. In 1999, lawyers for the 2 boys appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial, since they were too young to follow proceedings and understand an adult court. On March 15th of 1999, the court ruled 14-5 that there had been a violation in regards to the fairness of the trial of the boys, stating that the public trial process in an adult court may be regarded in the case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating procedure. In September of 1999, the Bulger family appealed to the Court of Human Rights but failed to persuade the court that a victim of the crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. In October of 2000, it was recommended that the minimum be shortened from 10 years back to 8. In June of 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled that the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released, as their minimum was up in February of that year. It was reported that the boys were released and were given new identities and moved to secret locations under a witness protection kind of program. There were terms to the release, including the following. They were not allowed to contact each other or the Bulger family. They were banned from visiting the region where the crime occurred. They had a curfew, and they must report to probation officers. If they breached any of the rules or were deemed a risk to the public, they could be returned to prison. There was a media blackout ordered on the boys before their release, as the authorities believed that there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known. While not much about Robert Thompson is known after this, there are many rumors about John Venables. In March 2010, the Ministry of Justice revealed that John had been returned to prison for an unspecified violation of the terms of his release. In May 2011, he was once again given a new identity following what was described as a serious security breach, which revealed an identity that he had used before his 2010 arrest. In September of 2013, it was announced that he had been released sometime prior. In November of 2017, it is reported that John was again arrested on possession of child sexual abuse imagery. In January of 2018, he was charged with unspecified offenses relating to indecent images of children, and on February 7, 2018, he pleaded guilty to possession of indecent images of children for a second time. He was denied parole in September of 2020, and his next parole hearing is scheduled to take place next month as of the time of this recording, November 2023. On March 4th of 2019, James's father, Ralph, lost a legal challenge to lift the lifelong order protecting John's anonymity. Once again, the court cited possible bodily harm or death to John if his identity was known. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sad story of James Bulger and the aftermath of his killers. This one's hard for me because do 10-year-olds deserve the same punishment that an adult does? Is a 10-year-old capable discerning right from wrong? You never know how children will turn out as adults, and both possibilities are seen in this case. Robert hasn't had anything wrong outside of his terms of release, and is probably living a mostly normal life. Whereas John has been arrested 2 more times and is currently in prison. What are your thoughts on crimes committed by children? At what age does a person know right from wrong? Is that something we can determine as a whole of society, or is this something that has to happen on a case-by-case basis? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.